The moment I opened my mailbox and saw the bright pink violation notice from the Homeowners Association, I knew my peaceful Tuesday afternoon was about to go completely sideways. I stood there in the driveway of my modest two-story house in Columbus, Ohio, reading the letter twice because I genuinely could not believe what I was seeing. According to the notice signed by one Brenda Patterson, the HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates, I was in violation of Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines for failing to maintain proper clearance around my air conditioning unit. The letter demanded that I immediately remove all snow and ice buildup from around the unit, as it was apparently creating an unsightly appearance and potentially damaging community property values. I looked up from the letter to my backyard, where my AC unit sat buried under 2 feet of fresh Ohio snow from last night's storm. It was January, the middle of January. The high temperature today was supposed to reach a balmy 17 degrees Fahrenheit. My name is Vincent Edwards, and I had been living in Meadowbrook Estates for exactly 8 months. When my wife Sarah and I bought this house the previous May, the neighborhood had seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained properties, and yes, an HOA that promised to keep everything looking pristine. What they had not mentioned was that the HOA president was a power-hungry lunatic with too much time on her hands. I walked back inside, kicking snow off my boots, and called Sarah at work. "Hey, honey," she answered, and I could hear the background noise of her dental office in the distance. "I got another HOA letter," I said. She groaned. "What is it this time?" "Is your grass still too long even though it's buried under snow? Even better. Brenda wants me to clear snow from around the AC unit." There was a pause. "The air conditioning unit? Yes. In January? Yes. Vincent, that does not make any sense." "I am aware." Sarah sighed. "What are you going to do?" "I think I'm going to go have a conversation with our dear HOA president." "Be nice," Sarah warned. "We have to live here." I promised I would be diplomatic, hung up, and immediately started searching for Brenda Patterson's address in the HOA directory. She lived 3 streets over in a house that was, predictably, the most meticulously maintained property in the entire development. Even her snow removal was perfect, with the driveway cleared down to bare concrete, and the edges so precise they looked like they had been cut with a laser. I drove over rather than walked because the temperature was dropping, and I was not about to freeze my fingers off for Brenda Patterson. Her doorbell played an elaborate chime that sounded like it cost more than my monthly car payment. The woman who answered the door was exactly what I had expected. Brenda Patterson was probably in her mid-50s, with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I would like to speak to the manager," and a cardigan that looked like it had never experienced anything as undignified as a wrinkle. Her lips were pursed in what appeared to be a permanent expression of disapproval. "Vincent Edwards," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "I assume you are here about your violation notice." "I am," I said, keeping my voice level. "I was hoping we could discuss it." She did not invite me in. Instead, she crossed her arms and stood in the doorway, letting all the heat escape from her house. "There is nothing to discuss. The guidelines are quite clear. All exterior units must be maintained with proper clearance at all times. Mrs. Patterson, it is January. That is snow around my AC unit, from the snowstorm. That happened last night. I am aware of the weather, Mr. Edwards. Then you understand that clearing snow from around an air conditioning unit in the middle of winter is completely pointless. The unit is not running. It will not run for months. The snow will melt on its own when spring comes." Brenda's expression somehow became even more pinched. "The guidelines do not make exceptions for weather or seasons." If we allow one homeowner to neglect their property maintenance, it sets a precedent for others to do the same. Before you know it, the entire neighborhood looks like a slum. A slum, I repeated, because of snow in winter in Ohio. I do not appreciate your tone, Mr. Edwards. And I do not appreciate getting violation notices for nonsensical reasons. We stared at each other for a long moment. A gust of frigid wind whipped between us, and I saw her shiver slightly, but she did not budge from the doorway. You have 48 hours to clear the snow from around your AC unit, or you will receive a fine of $50 per day until the violation is corrected, she said. Good afternoon. She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, contemplating my options. I could comply with her ridiculous demand, spend an hour in sub-freezing temperatures clearing snow from around a piece of equipment that would not be used for months. Or I could stand my ground on principle and rack up daily fines that would eventually lead to a lien on my house. Neither option appealed to me. When I got home, I did what any reasonable person in the 21st century would do. I started researching. I pulled out my copy of the HOA guidelines, all 73 pages of mind-numbing regulations, and began reading through Section 12 in detail. Section 12.4 did indeed state that all exterior mechanical units must be maintained with proper clearance as specified by the manufacturer. I went outside, brushed snow off the AC unit, and took a photo of the manufacturer's label. Then I went to the manufacturer's website and downloaded the installation and maintenance manual. According to the manual, the unit required 24 inches of clearance on all sides for proper airflow during operation. During winter months when the unit was not in operation, the manual specifically stated that covering or allowing snow accumulation around the unit would not cause damage and could actually provide additional insulation for the components. I had my ammunition. The next morning, I drafted a formal response to the HOA violation notice. I cited the specific manufacturer guidelines, included printouts of the relevant pages from the manual, and politely explained that not only was clearing the snow unnecessary, but the snow accumulation was actually not in violation of any reasonable interpretation of the HOA guidelines. I hand-delivered my response to Brenda's mailbox, feeling quite satisfied with myself. That satisfaction lasted approximately 36 hours. The next violation notice arrived with an additional charge. Now, I was being fined not only for the snow around the AC unit, but also for disrespectful communication with HOA board members and failure to comply with lawful directives in a timely manner. The fines had jumped to $75 per day. Sarah found me at the kitchen table that evening, surrounded by printouts of HOA regulations and Ohio property law. "This is getting out of hand," she said, sitting down across from me. "She is completely unreasonable," I said. I provided documentation proving that her interpretation of the rules is wrong, and she responded by adding more fines. Can she do that? Apparently she thinks she can. Sarah picked up the latest violation notice and read it carefully. "Vincent, this says there is an HOA board meeting next Tuesday. You can appeal the fines at the meeting." I had not noticed that part. Do you think it would actually help? It cannot hurt to try. And maybe some of the other board members are more reasonable than Brenda. The following Tuesday evening, I found myself walking into the community center at Meadowbrook Estates for my first HOA board meeting. The room was set up with a table at the front for the board members and several rows of chairs for homeowners. I was surprised to see that about 15 other people had shown up. Brenda sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members I did not recognize. She was wearing another perfect cardigan and had a stack of papers in front of her that she kept organizing and reorganizing. The meeting started with the usual boring business. They discussed the budget for landscaping, debated the merits of different snow removal contractors, and reviewed some minor updates to the pool regulations for the upcoming summer season. I sat there trying not to fall asleep. Finally, Brenda cleared her throat. Now we will move on to violations and appeals. Mr. Vincent Edwards has requested to appeal recent fines levied against his property. Mr. Edwards, you have 5 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, carrying my folder of documentation. I explained the situation clearly and calmly, presented the manufacturer guidelines, and pointed out that the HOA rules themselves stated that manufacturer specifications took precedence in matters of equipment maintenance. Furthermore, I concluded, I would like to point out that requiring homeowners to clear snow from non-operational seasonal equipment is not only unnecessary but potentially wasteful. We should be encouraging responsible resource use, not forcing people to spend time and energy on pointless tasks. One of the other board members, an older man whose nameplate identified him as Robert Chen, nodded thoughtfully. That seems reasonable. Brenda's head snapped toward him. Robert, we cannot allow homeowners to simply ignore the guidelines whenever they find them inconvenient. I am not suggesting that, Robert said. But Mr. Edwards makes a valid point. If the manufacturer says snow accumulation during winter months is not a problem, then perhaps we need to interpret our rules with some common sense. Another board member, a woman named Jennifer Morrison, spoke up. I agree with Robert. This seems like an overreach. I felt a surge of hope. Brenda's face was turning an interesting shade of red. The rules exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions, it is not an exception, Robert interrupted. It is a reasonable interpretation based on manufacturer specifications and common sense. The board voted. 3 members voted to dismiss my fines. Brenda and 1 other member voted against dismissal. I had won. I should have known it would not be that easy. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more violation notices. One claimed that my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection. Another stated that my front door wreath was not in compliance with decoration guidelines. The third accused me of parking my car on the street overnight, which was apparently forbidden under Section 8.2. Every single violation was either completely false or so ridiculously nitpicky that it was clearly personal retaliation. The trash can complaint was particularly absurd because I had security camera footage showing that I brought my cans back to the garage within 40 minutes of the garbage truck leaving. The wreath was a simple evergreen decoration that matched half the other wreaths in the neighborhood. And the overnight parking complaint was dated on a night when my car had been parked in my garage, which I could prove with my smart garage door logs. I filed appeals for all 3 violations, providing documentation for each one. The other board members were starting to look annoyed at these meetings. I was not the only one noticing Brenda's pattern of behavior. This is the 3rd appeal from Mr. Edwards in as many weeks, Jennifer said at the next board meeting. Brenda, are you personally inspecting his property looking for violations? I inspect all properties in the community, Brenda replied stiffly. It is my duty as HOA president. You do not inspect all properties this thoroughly, Robert said. I have lived here for 12 years, and I have never received a single violation notice. Are you telling me my property has been in perfect compliance for 12 years straight? Brenda did not answer. The board dismissed all 3 of my fines unanimously, with Brenda abstaining from the votes. As I left the meeting that night, Robert pulled me aside. She is not going to stop, he said quietly. "Brenda does not like being challenged. What do you suggest I do? Document everything. Keep records of every interaction, every violation notice, every piece of evidence proving they are false. If she keeps this up, you may need to take legal action." "I really do not want to sue my HOA. Neither does anyone else," Robert said. "But sometimes it is the only way to stop this kind of harassment." February arrived with even colder temperatures and more snow. My AC unit remained buried, and I made absolutely sure to keep every other aspect of my property in perfect compliance with HOA rules. I measured my grass height even though the grass was dormant. I timed how long my trash can stayed at the curb. I documented everything. Brenda found new things to complain about. A violation notice arrived claiming that my mailbox post was weathered and needed repainting. Never mind that every other mailbox post on my street was also weathered from the same winter conditions. Another notice stated that icicles hanging from my gutters were a safety hazard and needed to be removed immediately. This one was particularly ironic because Brenda's own house had icicles twice as long as mine. I appealed everything. The board dismissed everything. Robert and Jennifer were clearly frustrated with Brenda, but they seemed unsure how to address the situation directly. Then things escalated. I came home from work on a Thursday in mid-February to find a notice taped to my front door. This one was not printed on the usual pink violation paper. It was white, official-looking, and marked legal notice. According to the document, the HOA was filing a lien against my property for continued and willful violation of community guidelines and failure to pay accumulated fines. The total amount listed was $2,340. I stared at the number in disbelief. Every single fine I had received had been appealed and dismissed by the board. There were no outstanding violations against my property. This lien was completely fraudulent. I called Sarah immediately. "She is claiming we owe over $2,000 in fines," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But the board dismissed all the fines." "I know. Vincent, she cannot just file a fake lien. That has to be illegal." "I think it is. I think we need a lawyer." That evening, I contacted 3 different attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes. The first one wanted a retainer fee that was more than the fraudulent lien. The second one told me it would take months to resolve and probably was not worth the hassle. The third one, a sharp woman named Amanda Rodriguez, listened to my entire story and then said something unexpected. "Mr. Edwards, I think we can make a strong case not just for removing the lien, but for harassment and potentially fraud. Filing a lien based on fines that were officially dismissed by the board is not just wrong, it is illegal. If you want to fight this, I am interested." We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. Over the weekend, I did more research. I discovered that Brenda had been HOA president for almost 8 years, which was unusual. Most HOA boards rotated leadership every few years. I also found online forums where other Meadowbrook Estates residents complained about her behavior. One post from 2 years ago described a situation nearly identical to mine, where Brenda had targeted a homeowner with increasingly absurd violations until the person eventually sold their house and moved away. I was not going to be that person. Monday's meeting with Amanda Rodriguez was productive. She reviewed all my documentation, including every violation notice, every appeal, every piece of evidence I had gathered, and all the board meeting minutes I had requested through the HOA's public records process. "This is good," she said, making notes. "You have been very thorough. The pattern of harassment is clear, and the fraudulent lien is the smoking gun we need." I think we should send a formal cease and desist letter first, giving the HOA board an opportunity to remove the lien and stop the harassment voluntarily. If they do not comply, we file suit. How much is this going to cost me? Amanda quoted me a number that made me wince, but it was manageable. More importantly, she said that if we won, we could potentially recover attorney fees and damages from the HOA. One more thing, Amanda said. I want to make sure you understand that suing your HOA may not make you popular in the neighborhood. Right now, the HOA president is harassing me with fake violations and filing fraudulent liens against my house, I said. I am not particularly concerned about popularity. The cease and desist letter went out on Tuesday. It detailed every violation notice I had received, the board's dismissal of those violations, and the illegal filing of a lien based on non-existent debt. It demanded that the HOA remove the lien within 7 business days and cease all retaliatory actions against my property. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Robert Chen from the HOA board. Vincent, I just saw the letter your attorney sent, he said. I want you to know that most of the board had no idea Brenda filed that lien. She did not bring it to a board vote. So she filed it unilaterally. It appears that way. Jennifer and I are calling for an emergency board meeting tomorrow night. We need to address this situation before it gets any worse. I appreciate you letting me know. For what it is worth, I am sorry this has happened. Brenda has been getting worse over the years, but this is beyond anything she has done before. Thursday night's emergency HOA board meeting was packed. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about the fraudulent lien, and people were angry. I recognized several faces from the online forums where residents had complained about Brenda's behavior. Brenda sat at the board table looking defiant. She had her stack of papers, her perfect cardigan, and an expression that suggested she was the victim in this situation. Robert called the meeting to order. We are here to discuss the lien filed against Vincent Edwards' property and the circumstances surrounding it. Brenda, according to our bylaws, liens can only be filed after a board vote. Can you explain why this lien was filed without board approval? I am the president of this HOA, Brenda said. I have the authority to enforce the rules and collect fines owed to the association. But there are no fines owed, Jennifer said. We dismissed all the violations against Mr. Edwards' property. You dismissed them incorrectly, Brenda snapped. Those were legitimate violations, and the fact that the board chose to ignore them does not change that. The room erupted. Multiple homeowners started talking at once, many of them sharing their own stories of harassment and bogus violations from Brenda. Robert had to call for order several times. The board majority voted to dismiss those fines, Robert said firmly. You do not have the authority to override board votes or file liens unilaterally. This is not how the HOA operates. Then perhaps it should be, Brenda said. Someone needs to maintain standards in this community, and clearly the rest of you are too weak to do it. One of the other board members, a quiet man named Thomas Wright, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. I move that we remove the lien against Mr. Edwards' property immediately and issue a formal apology. I second that motion, Jennifer said quickly. The vote was 4 in favor, 1 against. Brenda was outvoted. Furthermore, Robert said, I move that we open an investigation into all liens and fines filed over the past 2 years to ensure they were properly authorized and legally valid. This motion also passed 4-1. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You people have no spine, she said. This community is going to fall apart without proper leadership. Brenda, Robert said, his voice tired, Maybe you should consider stepping down as president." "Absolutely not. I was elected to this position." "You were elected 8 years ago and have run unopposed ever since, because anyone who tried to challenge you mysteriously started receiving violation notices until they gave up." The room had gone quiet. Brenda looked around at the faces staring at her, and for the first time, I saw her confidence waver. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, even though she did not have the authority to make that decision, and walked out. Over the next week, things moved quickly. The HOA formally removed the lien from my property and sent me a written apology. Robert and Jennifer started investigating Brenda's actions over the previous years and discovered a pattern of unauthorized fines, questionable violations, and what appeared to be personal vendettas against multiple homeowners. One particularly disturbing discovery was that Brenda had been collecting fines from some homeowners that had never been approved by the board and depositing them into a separate bank account that she controlled. The total amount was over $18,000. That was when the situation moved from civil dispute to criminal investigation. Robert contacted the Franklin County District Attorney's office, and a detective was assigned to investigate possible embezzlement and fraud. I spoke with the detective, a methodical woman named Detective Sarah Williams, and provided all my documentation. Several other homeowners came forward with their own stories and evidence. Meanwhile, I still had to deal with winter and the original absurdity that started everything. March arrived with warmer temperatures, and the snow around my AC unit began to melt naturally, exactly as I had known it would. I took photos documenting the unit's perfect condition and the fact that no damage had occurred from the snow accumulation. The HOA board scheduled a special election for a new president. Robert Chen ran unopposed and won easily. His first action was to propose amendments to the HOA bylaws that would limit presidential terms, require board votes for all fines and liens, and create an appeals process that was independent of the board. In early April, Brenda Patterson was formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and filing false liens. The district attorney's office built a solid case using the documentation that multiple homeowners had provided. Brenda hired an expensive lawyer and tried to claim that she had been acting in the HOA's best interest, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The trial took place in September. I attended several days of testimony, watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the pattern of harassment, unauthorized fines, and financial misappropriation. Brenda sat at the defense table looking smaller than she had in her doorway that January day, her perfect cardigan replaced with a conservative suit that her lawyer had probably chosen. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened in October. The judge was not sympathetic. He sentenced Brenda to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution to all the homeowners she had defrauded. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state of Ohio. Standing outside the courthouse that day, Sarah took my hand. "It is finally over," she said. "Yeah," I agreed. "It is." We drove home to Meadowbrook Estates, where the trees were showing their autumn colors and the neighborhood looked peaceful. Our house sat on its quiet street, the AC unit in the backyard visible from where I parked the car. It was September, so the unit was still running, keeping our house cool during the last warm days of the year. By the time winter came around again, it would shut down for the season, and snow would probably accumulate around it once more. This time, nobody would complain. The HOA board under Robert's leadership had transformed the organization. They had streamlined the rules, eliminating many of the nitpicky regulations that served no real purpose. They had implemented a formal complaint process that required evidence and reasonable cause before violations could be issued. Most importantly, they had created a culture where board members saw themselves as servants of the community rather than rulers over it. Several homeowners who had been driven away by Brenda's harassment reached out to the new board, and some even considered moving back to the neighborhood. The property values which Brenda had claimed to be protecting actually increased once word got around that the tyrannical HOA president was gone. I ran into Robert one Saturday in November while we were both working in our yards. "How is everything going with the board?" I asked. "Better than I expected, actually," he said. "People are engaged now. We have had 3 homeowners volunteer to join committees. That never happened under Brenda, because everyone was afraid of being targeted." "Exactly." Robert paused. "You know, I should have stood up to her years ago. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but it was easier to just go along with it. You did the right thing eventually. That is what matters. Still, I am sorry you had to go through all that over something as ridiculous as snow around an AC unit." I laughed. "When I got that first violation notice, I never imagined it would lead to a criminal trial and someone going to prison. Neither did any of us." As winter approached again and the first snow began to fall, I thought about how one small act of standing up for basic common sense had snowballed into major changes for an entire community. The snow accumulated around my AC unit exactly as it had the previous year, and exactly as I had predicted. It caused 0 problems. In December, the HOA sent out their annual newsletter. It included an article about winter property maintenance that specifically stated homeowners should not waste time or resources on unnecessary snow removal from seasonal equipment. It also included a note from Robert about the importance of reasonable, community-focused governance. Sarah and I hosted our first neighborhood holiday party that December. Under Brenda's reign, people had been too nervous about potential HOA violations to have gatherings that might attract attention. Now, with the oppressive atmosphere lifted, neighbors actually wanted to socialize. We had nearly 30 people in our house, eating cookies and drinking hot chocolate and talking about normal things like the upcoming holidays and the Browns' disappointing season, and whether we should get more snow before Christmas. Nobody mentioned HOA violations or fines or harassment. Jennifer Morrison pulled me aside at one point during the party. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" "For having the courage to fight back. A lot of people, including me, just put up with Brenda's behavior because we did not want the conflict. You showed us that standing up to bullies is worth it." "I just did not want to clear snow off my AC unit in January," I said. She laughed. "Sometimes the small battles matter the most." The following February, a full year after the original violation notice, I got a piece of mail from the HOA. For a split second, my stomach clenched with the old anxiety. Then I opened it and found that it was just a reminder about the upcoming annual meeting and a request for input on proposed improvements to the community playground. I stood in my driveway, looking at the benign, normal HOA correspondence in my hand, and felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning a legal battle. It was the satisfaction of living in a community that functioned the way it was supposed to function, where rules made sense and were applied fairly, where neighbors looked out for each other instead of reporting each other for imaginary infractions. My AC unit sat in the backyard, buried under fresh snow from last night's storm. It would stay that way until spring, when the snow would melt and the unit would emerge unscathed, ready for another summer of keeping my house comfortable. Exactly as nature and the manufacturer intended. The whole saga had taught me several important lessons. First, that HOA boards are only as good or as bad as the people serving on them. Second, that documentation is crucial when dealing with any kind of harassment or abuse of power. Third, that sometimes fighting back against obvious injustice is not just about winning, but about preventing others from becoming future victims. And finally, I learned that common sense should never be controversial, even though sometimes it takes a court case to establish that fact. In March, the Ohio State Legislature passed a new law that placed additional restrictions on HOA authority and created stronger protections for homeowners against harassment and fraudulent fines. The law had been inspired in part by Brenda's case and similar situations in other communities around the state. Robert testified before a legislative committee about the need for the reforms. HOAs serve an important purpose, he told the committee. But that purpose is to enhance community living, not to give petty tyrants a platform for harassment. Reasonable regulation should never look like persecution. The law passed with bipartisan support, and Governor Mike DeWine signed it in April. It required HOAs to maintain public records of all fines and liens, mandated board votes for any financial penalties over $50, and created a state-level appeals process for homeowners who believed they were being unfairly targeted. I followed the progress of the law with interest, grateful that some good had come from my frustrating experience. If even one other homeowner was spared from dealing with a Brenda Patterson situation, then everything I had gone through was worth it. Sarah and I celebrated our first anniversary in the house in May, exactly 1 year after we had moved in and 16 months after the snow on the AC unit incident that had changed everything. We invited Robert and his wife Linda, Jennifer and her husband Mark, and a few other neighbors over for a barbecue. To surviving your first year in Meadowbrook Estates, Robert toasted, raising his beer, which was considerably more dramatic than most first years. To reasonable HOA regulations, I countered, and to board members who actually care about the community. We clinked glasses and bottles, and I looked around at the friendly faces gathered in my backyard. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Not fear of violation notices or anxiety about retaliatory fines, but genuine connection with the people who lived around you. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Sarah and I were cleaning up, she leaned against the kitchen counter and smiled at me. "You know what I am most proud of," she said. "What? You never backed down. When Brenda started harassing you, you could have just cleared the snow off the AC unit and let her win, but you stood up for what was right. I was just being stubborn. No, you were being principled." There is a difference. I thought about that as I finished loading the dishwasher. Maybe she was right. Maybe it had not been about stubbornness or pride, but about refusing to accept that obvious nonsense should go unchallenged just because someone in a position of minor authority said so. The following winter brought more snow, as Ohio winters always do. My AC unit disappeared under white drifts, and I let it stay that way without a second thought. No violation notices appeared in my mailbox. The HOA was functioning the way it should, addressing real issues like snow removal from community roads and maintaining common areas, while leaving homeowners alone to manage their own properties with common sense. Brenda served her prison sentence at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. I occasionally wondered what she thought about during those 18 months, whether she had any regrets or whether she still believed she had been right all along. I never tried to contact her or find out. That chapter of the story was closed, and I was content to leave it that way. In the spring of that second year, Robert announced that he would not be running for re-election as HOA president. He had served his term, implemented the reforms he believed were necessary, and was ready to pass the torch to someone else. Jennifer Morrison ran for the position and won easily. Under Jennifer's leadership, the HOA continued to improve. She launched a neighborhood beautification program that was genuinely voluntary, where homeowners could participate if they wanted to, but faced no penalties if they chose not to. She organized community events that brought neighbors together. She even managed to negotiate better rates with the landscaping and snow removal contractors, saving every homeowner money on their annual HOA fees. It turned out that, when an HOA focused on actually serving the community instead of controlling it, everyone benefited. I never forgot that first violation notice, though. I kept it in a folder with all the other documentation from that period, a reminder of how a single absurd demand had led to exposing corruption and reforming an entire system. Sometimes, I would pull out the folder and read through the papers, marveling at how far things had progressed. "Why do you keep looking at that stuff?" Sarah asked me once. "I guess I want to remember what we overcame," I said. "It is easy to take good governance for granted when you have it, but we fought for this." She understood. She had been there through all of it, supporting me through the frustration and stress, encouraging me to stand firm when it would have been easier to give in. Years passed. We became established members of the Meadowbrook Estates community. We knew all our neighbors by name. We attended HOA meetings not out of fear, but out of genuine interest in community decisions. We served on committees and participated in neighborhood events, and generally lived the kind of normal, pleasant suburban life that we had hoped for when we first bought the house. And every winter, without fail, snow accumulated around my AC unit. Every spring, it melted away. The cycle repeated itself with perfect predictability, causing exactly 0 problems, just as I had known it would that January day when I received Brenda Patterson's ridiculous violation notice. The AC unit became something of a neighborhood joke, actually. New residents would hear the story and ask to see the famous AC unit that brought down a corrupt HOA president. I would laugh and show them the unremarkable metal box sitting in my backyard, looking exactly like every other AC unit in every other backyard in the subdivision. "That is it," they would say. "That is what all the fuss was about." "That is it," I would confirm. Never underestimate the power of someone in authority being completely unreasonable about something completely unimportant. The story of Brenda Patterson and the snow-covered AC unit became part of the neighborhood's oral history, told to new residents as both a cautionary tale and a reminder that communities are only as good as the people who participate in them. It became a teaching moment about the importance of reasonable governance and the danger of letting small-time tyrants go unchallenged. Local media had covered the trial when it happened, and occasionally reporters would follow up on the story. I gave a few interviews over the years, always emphasizing the same points. Document everything, stand up for common sense, and remember that HOA boards are made up of volunteers who should be serving the community, not ruling it. One interview ended up in a national publication about HOA reform, and I started getting emails from people across the country who were dealing with their own nightmare HOA situations. I tried to help when I could, offering advice about documentation and legal resources, and the importance of building coalitions with other affected homeowners. Some of those people won their battles, some did not. but all of them appreciated knowing they were not alone in facing down the petty tyranny of power-drunk HOA board members. In one particularly memorable case, a woman in Arizona was being fined for having desert landscaping that the HOA claimed violated appearance standards, even though the landscaping was specifically designed to conserve water during droughts and was actually encouraged by state and local governments. I connected her with Amanda Rodriguez, my attorney, who referred her to a colleague in Arizona. The woman won her case. The HOA rules were changed to allow water conservation landscaping, and she sent me a thank you card with a photo of her beautiful drought-resistant yard. These small victories added up. Across the country, homeowners were pushing back against unreasonable HOA regulations, courts were ruling in favor of common sense, and state legislatures were passing reforms. The pendulum was swinging away from unchecked HOA authority and toward balanced governance that respected both community standards and individual homeowner rights. None of it would have happened if people had just continued to accept the unreasonable demands and harassment without fighting back. Sarah and I eventually became so invested in HOA reform that we started attending city council meetings in Columbus, advocating for local ordinances that would protect homeowners from HOA overreach. We met other advocates, formed alliances, and became part of a broader movement toward fairer community governance. It was not how I had imagined spending my free time when we first bought a house in a nice neighborhood with an HOA. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns, and sometimes those turns lead you exactly where you need to be. On the 5th anniversary of the original violation notice, I stood in my backyard looking at my AC unit, which was once again covered in snow. The January day was cold and clear, and the snow sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Sarah came out and stood next to me, wrapping her coat tighter against the chill. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just remembering where this all started," I said. 5 years ago, I got a ridiculous violation notice about this AC unit. Now I am testifying before city councils and helping people across the country fight HOA abuse. It is kind of surreal. "You made a difference," Sarah said. "You could have just cleared the snow and moved on with your life. But you did not, and because of that, a lot of people are better off." "Brenda Patterson certainly is not," I observed. "Brenda Patterson made her own choices. She could have been a reasonable person serving her community. Instead, she chose to be a tyrant. The consequences were her own fault." I nodded, knowing she was right. I had never taken any pleasure in Brenda going to prison, but I also felt no guilt about it. She had committed crimes and she had faced justice. That was how the system was supposed to work. The AC unit sat there in the snow, silent and patient, waiting for spring to come and summer to follow. It had become a symbol of something larger than itself, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance against obvious stupidity can lead to meaningful change. As Sarah and I walked back inside, I took one last look at the snow-covered unit and smiled. 5 years ago, I could not have imagined that refusing to clear snow from an air conditioner in winter would lead to criminal prosecution, state legislation, and a personal mission to reform HOA governance. But that was exactly what had happened, and I would do it all again.